guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I don't need a mic. Those of you who have me as a faculty member know that. I also want to just quickly acknowledge in the back corner all of the other social work faculty who've been there. You know who they are. And so Pam, so we're going to find out, calm down. Pam is going to go ahead and start with introductions of our esteemed panel today. There will be time for students to ask questions, and I'm very hopeful that all of you will ask questions, okay?
All right. Yay!
All of you ask questions.
How many people here? Thank you so much, all of you, for being here as well. I'd like to introduce our panel. We're very, very fortunate to have members of our community here today, just because the way I typed it out. So I apologize if you don't go first.
No,
Are you going to be mad?
really okay.
So, Vice Mayor Jamie Whelan.
I'm a W. I'm used to being last.
There you go. Well, there you get to go first. And she's a council member, and she was elected to the Flagstaff City Council in November of 2016, and then she was selected by the council to serve as a vice mayor. She's lived in Flagstaff for over 26 years, and she's owned several small businesses while continuing her career as a teacher. She and her wife, Laura Ann, have 2 children and have owned the Old Town Creperie for over 12 years. Jamie started her teaching career in New Jersey, where she worked as a special educator. I'm just nervous. She also taught at the Flagstaff Unified School District for over 12 years, and she received the Moral Courage Award for teaching tolerance and humanitarian values. She began teaching at NAU in the College of Education, Educational Specialties Department. She was also awarded Teacher of the Year by her colleagues, and she joined the NAU Teacher Academy. She's also been a senior lecturer, and she coordinated, directed, and supervised the Praxis Partnership Program, preparing teachers to teach in the field of elementary education and special education. She's received the Golden Axe. You've done a lot of really
I was very busy.
She was very busy, and she's been a board member and president of Victim Witness Services of Coconino County. And a quote is, "I look forward to participation in the city council whose members collaborate with one another, a city council that is based in the community's collective wisdom, one that is transparent, and one that you can count on." So welcome. We love having you here. Our next is Mayor Coral Evans, and she was elected as mayor in November 2016. She is not new to the, even though she's new to being the mayor, she's not new to the Flagstaff City Council. She started serving on the City Council back in 2008. She is the 3rd generation of her family to live in Flagstaff, and they have been her family has been an active part of the community since the early 1900s. In addition to serving on the council, Ms. Evans is the executive director of a nonprofit organization and a small business owner. Mayor Evans is also a published author and is pursuing a PhD in education with an emphasis in sustainability. She holds a master's degree in business administration and a bachelor's degree in business management. She also has won numerous awards and recognitions, including the Greater Flagstaff Chamber of Commerce, United Way of Northern Arizona Community Builder Award, the Coconino Hispanic Advisory Council Cesar E. Chavez Community Award, the Seroptimus International Ruby Award, the State of Black Arizona Community Luminary Award, the Arizona Information Newsmaker Award, and the Arizona Community Action Association's Margie Frost Champion Against Poverty Award. And that's just the ones they sent to me. There could be many, many more. So thank you so much for being here. Jacqueline Salvi is a Native American. She's from the Native Connections Program Manager. She is Dene Navajo, and she resides in Flagstaff, Arizona, and is a mother of 2 and works at Native Americans for Community Action as the Native Connections Program Manager. Native Connections is a 5-year grant funded through SAMHSA that is funded on Native American youth mental health. Jacqueline received her bachelor's degree from Northern Arizona University and her master's degree from Arizona State University. You are a MSW. Jacqueline has been in the social work field for more than 10 years and also acts as a board member for the Coconino Coalition for Child and Youth and is currently a court-appointed special advocate. Thank you, Jacqueline. Pinky Beasley is a field organizer for Repeal Coalition Arizona and, do I say this right, Puente, Arizona? She's lived also in Flagstaff since 2010. She has a degree in environmental studies and a master's degree in sustainable communities, both achieved at NAU. She's worked with action research teams that engage NAU students in public issues and needs, such as environmental justice, the creation of food and water sustainable systems, engaged pedagogy advocacy in local elementary schools, and immigration justice. She also helped to bring the fossil fuel divestment momentum to NAU, pressuring the university to remove all fossil fuel investments and move toward carbon neutrality. She's worked with the civic engagement and taught a course here at NAU on democracy. She was the program coordinator for Get Out the Vote for local Friends of Flagstaff's future. She's been the spokesperson for Flagstaff Living Wage Coalition, which successfully organized to increase Flagstaff's local minimum wage and protect against ongoing wage theft that many workers experience. She's also worked with Repeal Coalition Arizona, and she's worked as an advocate for exposing unjust working conditions in the local hotel industry and mobilizing workers to advocate for a more just work environment, better wages, and really pushing for city level changes that protect undocumented community members from potential ICE threats. There's numerous other things that Frankie has done, and we really appreciate. The last thing, though, was kind of cool. She's a member of the Wrecking Ball Flagstaff, a group that puts on monthly queer resist dance parties fundraisers for the Flagstaff community, which raises bail bond funds for undocumented community members. Thank you. Mr. Art Babbitt is the Coconino County District's 1 supervisor and the current chair of the Board of Supervisors. And he is an elected independent and a small business owner. He and his wife and daughter have owned and operated the Flagstaff Community Farmer Markets for over 18 years. He has a degree in political science and a master's degree in urban affairs and public policy. Some of his community involvement and public service include being on the transportation board, being on the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Sustainable Economic Development Initiative, the Coconino County Public Health Services, the Council of Governments, Arts Council, Water Commission, Big Kids of Northern Arizona Board, and the Board of Directors for Flagstaff Food Link. Thank you so much for being here. So now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Medill, who's going to come up and she's going to moderate a discussion with our panel members.
Thank you, Pam. I'm not going to come up. I'm going to stay off the screen, but I will be moderating. So thank you. First and foremost, I do want students to take an opportunity today to soak in what your futures could look like. I mean, listen to how accomplished our panel members are, and it's because they have a commitment to doing community work. So I'm going to be asking the questions that you have in front of you. I don't expect that we'll get everyone, so we're not going to go like in a round robin. I'll just kind of pick and choose, and the students will tell you that's my style in class too. So I think we're going to go ahead and start with Jacqueline, who's our social work alumni. And what kind of advocacy activities have you been involved in at the community level? And how were they received or responded to by your constituents?
All right. Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you for having
do have a
me
mic.
here.
Jamie,
Oh,
you have to-
oh.
And it should be on.
Testing, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. I have a small voice, so this is very, this is very good. First off, I'd like to thank you all for having me here. I know this panel is like, wow, that's awesome. I'm sitting here like, whoa, I'm on this panel with the mayor and everyone else. So, but yes, I am an alumni of NAU Social Work. So I was here something years ago, I won't even say. But for myself as a social worker, if you look into the National Association of Social Work ethical guidelines that we have to follow, we all have a responsibility as social workers to give back to the broader society, right? So with that, I know in Mr. McKell's class, when he would bring up public policy or policies in general, or anything that has to do with the government, or anything that had to do with a law, the first thing that came out of my mouth and my eyes was like, I roll, this is boring, what does this have to do with me? I'm a social worker, I'm gonna be working in direct practice, I'm gonna be working with child protective services, that's above me and beyond me. But as I grew, as I began to look into masters in social work, that is everything. So I really encourage you all to take note of what's happening currently in the political atmosphere, because that is very, very important, and it's going to affect your services that are being provided to our clients, to our population. So with that, what was I involved in? So I'm pretty much focused on children and families. Whatever is being pushed, or whatever politicians are being put into office. Right now, the coalition, we focus on those individuals who are running for office and what their stance is in regards to children and families. So anything that has to do with the impacts that are going to affect them, we go through and we created a survey of what exactly their views are. So we really push what is going to happen or who's going to be elected. So at the community level, there's a lot of different spheres that you can go into. And working with Native Connections and the SAMHSA grants that I'm currently in at Native Americans for Community Action, those are very important to look at, as well as the history of Native Americans, because politics affects each and every one of us, especially those from ethnic minorities, those populations and historical trauma, taking that into consideration and how that goes down the line. And even today with our immigration and what's happening, you can really see what the timeline, even with the Mexican Americans, the Dreamers Act, SB 1070, and all of that. So it's very important that working in social work, regardless of what sphere you're working in, the policies are going to affect you regardless. And was that just the first question?
Yeah, and so I hope that, and I appreciate that you're talking about historical trauma and being reflected or reflective of that when you're thinking about policies and practices and approaches to your constituents. And so I'm hoping that Jamie, you might want to respond to some of the input that Jackie just gave us.
Sure. I don't know if I need this. Do I need this? I might start singing. So a very interesting thing happened when I was not on council, and I believe it was right before I was elected, and I believe that the city wanted to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I believe that people on council got very excited and, oh yeah, let's do that because that'll be honoring. But our Indigenous community said, whoa, stop. We don't want your day. until you listen to us. And because of that, we were able to have, 4 or 5 different meetings, homelessness, 6 different meetings, community was there. It was a beautiful thing. And what the people from the city and other members of government did was sit and listen. Not talk, not tried to solve things, but we just listened to the trauma. And it really helped in changing how we do business, or at least I believe the city council, how it does business. That the opportunity to take time to listen first, then make a decision or ask how can we help as a city is gigantic. So that's just one thing that happens from this perspective, being on city council. Because I sat in the chambers kind of pointing my finger at city council and what they were saying. In fact, that's why I ran for city council, right? I wanted to change things. And now I have this other view. And those two things combined, I believe, makes me a good council member. So.
And I hope that all of us sitting in this room that are social workers heard 2 things that Jamie and Jackie talked about. The idea of listening, active listening. That's not foreign to any of us, correct? And also the idea of honoring perspectives. I think that Jackie said that the challenge to doing advocacy work, particularly for disenfranchised or unempowered populations, is greater. And so I appreciate that Jamie said we listened, and that the other thing that we did is we honored, and I think those are social work beliefs. I hope that we're all getting that. Yeah. And so I'd like to pass the mic over to Coral. And Coral, so the whole idea of what advocacy activities have you been involved in, and what has been your response from the constituents? And I appreciate that Jamie said one of the constituent groups, the Navajo, or perhaps it was Navajo and Hopi and other representative groups, said, we don't want your day until you hear us. So that constituency reaction was like, whoa, we're pushing back a little, right? But so what have your experiences been like?
So I just want to add a little bit to that before I move forward. I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that while City Council did move forward and we do now have Indigenous Peoples Day, that there were still people who showed up after the listening and the acknowledging that said they didn't want it. There were still individuals that were like, you haven't gone far enough and we're not ready to accept it. So I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. So some of the things I've been involved with in my career has been helping to organize in the Sunnyside neighborhood area, very specifically around the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association, as well as in the Southside neighborhood, as well as in Plaza Mayhem, and one neighborhood down in Phoenix. Some of the activities that we've done, I really believe in the concept of asset-based community development. That's how I was trained, and that's really what I believe in. I think there's many different forms of organizing, but really what has been successful that I have seen long-term is when you honor the assets that are in the community and you work to elevate those and showcase those, at the same time minimizing the deficits. I think a lot of times we go straight to the deficits, what's wrong, and we forget to acknowledge what is actually going right. And so that's really the model that we use in the neighborhood associations, and really the model that I take forward. One of the, I think the biggest strategies that we use, and I'm going back to Sunnyside, very specifically, when I got involved with Sunnyside, I moved into the neighborhood and I ended up going to their neighborhood meetings to start out. At that time, we had a crime rate of like 30% in the neighborhood. You have 10% of the population living there. Statistically, you're supposed to have 10% of the time. We had 30%. That first summer, we had 11 drive-by shootings at 8. And so what can we do to coalesce this neighborhood? The very first strategy we came up with, and we did a lot of bringing everybody to the table. We met a lot at Killip School. We put up trees, and we talked about assets. We didn't talk about the drive-by shootings, and we didn't talk about that kind of stuff. We talked about what are the assets, who has what skills in our community. And so like who has what skills of the mind, what skills of the hands, and what skills of the heart. Okay, and we put them up on a tree, and we made neighborhood trees. And then we focused on the concept of pride. Because during that time, you know, we asked people, where do you live? Oh, I live in Sunnyside. Or you'd ask somebody in the community, hey, let's talk about Sunnyside. Ooh, that's a scary place. So we're like, if we're going to change anything, we have to start with that. We have to have pride in ourselves, pride in our culture, pride in our sense of place. We have to change that, right? Before we can even try to address the other stuff that's going on. And so I really think that that's important. Also, it's the people who are experiencing the issue, they know how to solve it. We might have degrees and we might have knowledge and we might have all this stuff, but the individuals who are experiencing whatever it is, they can tell you what they need to fix it. They can tell you how to fix it, right? So really, in going in, like I really think that the people in the community should be the ones that are leading it. I think that's extremely important. And I think that if you're going into a community that you're not from, you're really there as just a resource. But I hope that that kind of handles.
I think Coral looked at my lecture notes from yesterday, right? I mean, it sounds like we're repeating what I talked about. And I think one of the things that you said that was, I hate to use this word, but for me is beautiful, is this whole idea of asset-based approaches to community change. And certainly this whole idea of coming in, and I talked about this yesterday, the idea of organic change versus the idea of experts coming in and leading the change. And so I think what you just described is a very organic process. And I think those of us in this room that want to do macro-based practice, we do have to be mindful of what Pearl just said, that we're going in as outsiders. We may have some expertise, but really the people with the expertise are the people that live in the community. And so I really thank you for highlighting that.
Can I just follow up with a really short story to kind of emphasize that? So we were talking about recycling in our neighborhood. This has been part of 10 years now. And it was a huge thing about recycling and reuse before it was cool. And someone came to one of our meetings and she was like, I'm here to show you all how to recycle. And that was not well, it wasn't taken very well. Because what the community's response at that meeting was, you drove here in a Prius. Some of us walk because we don't have money for a car. Or we take the bus not because it's full, we take the bus because that's our means of transportation. We already own bikes for the same reason. Our Tupperware happens to be, you know, leftover butter tins or something that we bought from the store. Some of us actually rinse our foil and reuse it. So instead of coming in here and telling us how we can be sustainable and how we can recycle, why don't we teach you what we've been doing for years as ethnic people? So.
Yeah, great. And I'd like to pass the mic down to Art, and then we'll work back to Frankie. So just Art, what you've been hearing from your colleagues, what are you reflecting on?
Great, so really appreciate being here. So first, I want to ask just a quick question. Who has done this so far? Great, thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who did not raise your hand, you had better have a pretty good excuse why it does not go up before Tuesday. And that I want to defend to the death your right not to vote, but you better have a good reason to do it. And I view voting as your license to complain. I view that with myself. And so for those who raised your hands, thank you. For those who didn't, I challenge you to make it happen before Tuesday. I really do. Because what we talk about in these circles comes back to the structure of how we have conversations in our communities and how we elect people to convene and facilitate those conversations. So I've been in elected office for quite a while, both at the city and at the county. And when I started looking at the questions and the conversations and hearing the discussion, it really is, it is about, as Coral mentioned, kind of empowering voices. It's about creating a playing field that has some semblance of equity to it and some semblance of transparency and competition to it. And I'll tell you what I mean by competition. And it really just started dawning on me, and it has for a number of years, that regardless of whether we're talking about mental health, emotional well-being of our community, economic justice, social justice, environmental issues, many of those components of what we would call, social change, being agents of social change, engaging in conversations. It has just become so clear to me over the last 10 years in politics that the breadth of that conversation is really contingent on the electoral system that convenes that conversation. So when I am really less of a topical-based empowerment person now than I am a systemic empowerment person. I talk a lot about electoral reform. I talk a lot about the structure of how we convene political conversations is engendering what we're getting today. And I don't know how many of you think we're getting robust, thoughtful, good, transparent conversations in our state and national government. I am not one who believes that is the case. I believe that we are failing drastically in addressing challenges and creating opportunities that people who live in our communities, regardless of social status, regardless of economic status, have the ability to engage in. So to me, it's really important that when we have people who who lead political conversations with outcomes or proposals like, I want to figure out how we can not have college students vote in the city of Flagstaff, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens by intention. And the people who bring those absolutely half-baked ideas forward they're not an aberration of a system. That is exactly what our electoral system, which is built on disenfranchising voters. It is built on parties being the gatekeepers of our elections as opposed to reasonable participants. That's what that is supposed to produce. It is not supposed to produce compromise and thoughtful discourse. And so when I think about social work, I think about populations who need a voice and come from communities who need empowerment to that voice. I get why probably less than half the hands just went up when I asked who voted. I get it. It's a hard proposition to say what I'm doing is making a difference to change the world that I'm in. So my challenge is let's figure out and work through to develop a system, an electoral system that allows all these discussions to actually have thoughtful discourse and not political hostage taking and grenade lobbing. And you see it, I gotta tell you, I see it equally on the left and equally on the right. And I think this notion that if I don't get 100% of what I want, I'm gonna lob a grenade into the discussion is exactly what's happening on left and right now. And we talked about this the other night. When was getting 60% of what you wanted a bad deal? And how we have our discussions, how we elect people. I brought some information on ranked choice voting. Let's talk about the system we engender that produces either outcomes or dysfunctional madness. And that's what we have, at least at the state and national level now.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a lot of discussion. Again, I just hope that students are hearing again, this whole validation about working with disenfranchised or unempowered. And I think that, Mr. Babbitt, the idea of having thoughtful conversation is another thing that we as social workers will have to learn how to facilitate. That when people are lobbying, I don't know if you said a grenade or a bomb, or when people are lobbying hateful speech or lobbying challenges to people that are untrue, we as social workers have to learn how to compromise and how to actively listen, agree to disagree, and then move forward in terms of creating change and helping, again, the experts in their communities have voices. I think that this has been a historical discussion, right? In empowering people with voice. Frankie, I know you do lots of work with disempowered populations, so.
Yeah. Well, I first of all want to push back a little bit on the notion of disempowered communities, because I think that's a term that those of us that do have access to resources and privilege, honestly, that we bestow upon a lot of the communities, the quote-unquote disenfranchised communities that we work with, when it's really those of us in those positions of power that have put those terms on them, right? That have given them less access to resources, that have made them disempowered basically since the inception of this country that we live in. So in terms of the advocacy work that I do, I've been organizing in Flagstaff since 2010. When I was 18, I came here and got involved immediately, both on campus and within the community through a program that has now been basically erased by the university that was called the Action Research Teams. And during that time, some of the issues that I worked with was we were pushing for, the city had a retrofit program that they offered to lower income, mostly working class community members as a way to help pay for utility bills. And that was some of the first work that I got involved with within the community. What that looks like was we were organizing in Sunnyside, which is a neighborhood that Mayor Evans mentioned, which is on the east side of the community. It's mostly working class communities of color, long-term community resident communities of Flagstaff. And we were door knocking saying, what is your experience living here? What are your working conditions? Are you able to pay your utility bills? And I was hearing different stories, actually face-to-face with community members in order to build a larger campaign, right? Because it's not our place as organizers, as social workers, as people in elected positions of power to say, we have this thing, this is what we're gonna do. You don't really have an input, maybe we'll accept some public comment. That was really not what we were trying to do. We're really trying to both inform and then be informed back by the community, right? Learning from them. I have been involved in electoral politics here. I have a tenuous relationship with electoral politics. I resonate a lot with what Art is saying, but it's complicated, right? We live in a democracy that is becoming more and more and more eroded, and it's already been eroded for a lot of people since the inception, right? And so, you know, the work that I do now is mostly around immigration justice, and that looks like working with undocumented community members in hearing experiences about threats in their workplace, hearing experiences and threats from the police or potential ICE, immigration, customs, and enforcement threats, which does happen in this community. I think a lot of people don't know that they do have a presence, not necessarily the same that they do in Phoenix or Tucson. But I do a multitude of advocacy issues. And that's important too, is we have to be intersectional in the work that we do. We can't just be siloed off because all of these issues do impact each other. And then in terms of how the work has been received by my constituents, I'm not elected, so I'm going to use my community. It depends, right? It depends on what you're engaging with. And I think what is of the utmost importance is that the community is always at the forefront of the work that we do. The community meaning, like for me, it would be the Latinx, working class, undocumented community, because that's the specific community that I mostly work with. If they are responding, wanting to go in a different direction, if they push back on some of the ideas that we may have, we have to go with that because, you know, echoing what I believe Jamie or Mayor Evans said is they know their conditions. They know the answers, and it's our place as those with power and privilege to really give those platforms, right? Because they're already empowered, but it's providing more space for them and pushing back on the constraints of them not having access to those spaces. So that's a really long-winded way of answering
It
that
was
question.
nicely winded, so thank you. I just wanted to, I do want to support what Frankie said, and I appreciate your kind of reframing for me. That, and it goes back to Coral's point that people in Sunnyside have been recycling forever. So yes, they're an empowered community, but we have, and certainly I'm one of the outsiders, right? So I appreciate that you're just making that point, and I think Coral provided a great example of that. And also this whole idea, I mean, one of the things that's on our ballot is expanding transportation, our transit system. Certainly people in the community have to use that system, and they would love the idea of an expansion, but to get their voice heard around that transportation issue has been somewhat difficult. Did you, Frankie, did you have a?
Well, I had a follow-up. It's not about transportation, so if you want to go down that road.
No, I don't have your stuff.
But I did want to just give an example of a concrete example of something that we were trying to do that the community responded and pushed back to, and that actually made the effort much better. So I was working with the Flagstaff Living Wage Coalition, and we knew obviously we wanted to increase the minimum wage in Flagstaff. This is a tourist-driven economy. Most people work in that. Most people work for minimum wage salaries. I'm sure you all work for minimum wage salaries, oftentimes multiple jobs. That's the case for a lot of community members as well. So when I was working with this group, we went to Repeal Coalition, who I now work with, and we said, what do y'all think about this? Do you think the community would receive this well? And they were like, let's go talk to them. So we door knocked, and a lot of the working class community said, yeah, raising our wages sounds really great, but I'm not even making the minimum wage to begin with. And so then we were starting to pull back the layers of some of the working conditions of people, specifically women that work in the hotel industry that were making far below the minimum wage, that were facing a lot of really horrible practices against them, working conditions against them. So that was a really important moment of we wanted to do something. We were pretty sure that the community would support it, but then being like, yeah, you need to go farther because this doesn't go far enough. We need more. So
Can we pass the mic back to Coral, Mayor Evans? So I'm wondering if you could give an example to the students about some of the greatest challenges you've had to work through to create community change, and then some of the accomplishments. So not only challenges, but some of the accomplishments that you can think of when doing political or community work or organization.
So greatest challenges and greatest accomplishments. So one of my greatest challenges that I think I have now is that I started out as a community organizer. So knocking on the doors, walking the streets, doing that. And then over time, the community's like, we have this issue. And so we started going before city council to basically lobby about that issue. And we're like, we're not getting anywhere, right? So then the community is like, you should run for office because we need somebody up there so we can have the conversation. So we have basically someone on the inside and someone on the outside. So you have community support and you get on the inside. And then when you get on the inside, you're not just in charge of that one issue that you were lobbying about, right? Because as an elected official, you have now 75,000 people who live in the city that all have different issues. And sometimes those issues conflict and sometimes they work together well. And it goes back to arts. Hey, we might be only able to get 60% of this. Where when you were the community organizer on this side of the dais, you're screaming for 100% of it. You want what you want, and that's what you want, and you're gonna walk away, drop the mic, take your stand, and go. Where if you're on the other side of it, having to represent a diverse group of people and all their needs and all the conflict, the best you might be able to do is 60%. But then what happens, right, is that the original constituency that you had, the original group, you changed. You drank the Kool-Aid. You're no longer one of us. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like. And then you come back with, hey, well, this is the situation on this side of the fence, for lack of a better word. These are the state laws against what we're trying to do. We need to change this law locally before we can come at it this way. And people don't want to hear it, right? So that to me has been a very interesting dynamic. And talking to other people that have kind of come into politics my way, we have like this group and we talk about that. How can we do a better job at either A, articulating what's happening on this side, so we can push from this side and push from this side and hopefully get to the change that we want to create. And then, quite frankly, how do we get more people who are community organizing on this side? Because maybe there's going to be strength in numbers, right? But that's what I see. And I see that, I think that that's disruptive, and I think it's sad. I think it's not helpful. And I think that that's part of the problem of us not all talking. And then I think when you deliver messages or information, like you got the information, it's not what people want to hear, people don't take well to that. So I just think that that's important, or at least that's what I see as the difficulties. Accomplishments, I think there's numerous accomplishments. I think being able to work together, and I'll give you an example. We had a youth group that came out of Sunnyside, right? The K-Kids came out of Sunnyside, and they were like, we do not like the fact that we go to the park and people are smoking. We're tired of that, we don't like it. So they actually came, sat down with members of council.
Can I just clarify, weed or cigarettes?
Cigarettes.
Oh.
Cigarettes. Conventional cigarettes.
They were the cats from Coconino.
Yeah, the cats from Coconino and Cat Stand. And sat down. They brought numerous different iterations of policy to us. We worked through the issues. We're like, this is not going to work. This is why it's not going to work. This will work. But at the end of the day, we crafted an ordinance. And those young people that most of them are not able to vote managed to get council to disallow any type of smoking in public parks. I'm not impressed with the young people. And now they're back before us and they want to get rid of e-cigarettes in parks. So they're busy working on that. So there's definitely accomplishments, and you definitely see that. It should be a model.
And I guess I want to make sure that everyone's hearing what Mayor Evans or Coral is saying, that the whole idea about being a member of the group, and then back in my day, we used to say you were a sellout. If you
I've heard that.
started to, yeah, you've heard the sellout, right? That you're a sellout because you joined the status quo. And I think as social workers in organization, one of the students yesterday talked about the concept of scarcity. And I challenge my students to not kind of swallow that myth too. That yes, there is scarcity in social welfare. There are limitations. We do have to prioritize. But that if you're a creative thinker, you can find ways around scarcity. That it may not be through a funded source, but it may be through just street sources or talking up to your neighbor's sources. And so I do think that somehow getting the two sides to come together and then also sharing resources. I appreciate the idea of prioritization, but how do we do that for insiders and those of us who've sold out, right? Because there are structures that Mr. Babbitt talked about. And so, Art, I wanted to go back to you about what Coral said and the whole idea of systemic obstacles to change.
So Coral just did an awesome job right there of enunciating, you know, what happens when this table gets put in between groups of people. It's fantastic. It was a great example. And so I'll just give you, so one of the challenges is when you're talking one of the things I've learned is complicated problems cannot be solved with simple solutions. And we continually try to solve complex problems with simple solutions. And by doing that, we miss what the heart of the problem is we're trying to get at. So I'll just continue on my piece about what are the challenges about creating, in my case, a democracy and electoral system where people don't believe the fix is in. And I don't care whether you call it rigged or not, it's largely predetermined, our political system. Whether, it was one thing Bernie and Donald Trump both at least enunciated, one I believe was genuine, one I believe was not, is that this is a largely rigged system. And that is because those of us who do not have the money, power, and influence do not get responded to in our political system. It's not by accident, it's by absolute intention. It is not by accident that the Corporation Commission, which regulates utilities, gets $3 million from APS to help seat that board. That's not by accident. It is not by accident that we created a system where the parties are the gatekeepers of the electoral system. They're not a participant. As an independent, if I run for state legislature, I have to get 4 times the signatures of a Republican or a Democrat. People said, that's outrageous. Well, it is outrageous, but it's a predictable outcome of a system that's run by people who don't have voters in mind. It doesn't have, it has a special interest in mind. So an example of, so you take that deafening, disheartening message of political disempowerment that is intentional and backed by dark money and all these things, and you take that place of despondency and you say, how do I move forward? One of the ways that we have moved forward that's on your ballot for those of you who voted here is about the merit selection of judges. We want to we're asking the citizens, we're going to take away judges having to run with a D or an R after their name and actually do something really novel. Appoint judges based on their judicial temperament, their experience, and their ability to do their job. What a shock. Guess what? Not everyone's happy we're asking that question, especially some Democrats who are in a Democratic-controlled county. To me, it is absolutely a good governance thing. And so there's an example. The board took put control to you. What do you think's in your best interest? Do we want a system where the law firms who sit in front of judges are contributing to their campaigns to get them elected? No, I don't believe we do. And so there's an example of how do you take a very complex problem that doesn't have a simple solution, which is electoral reform and just taking bites of this apple at a time. There's some amazing, empowering stories going on. The state of Maine with ranked choice voting. It is going to change the relationship between those who vote and those who are held accountable by those voters. Right now, there's no accountability. There has been one election in the last 5 for the state legislature in this district that even had a primary. There's no competition. There's no transparency. This is a fixes-in deal, by and large. And so let's solve that problem one step at a time. The judicial merit piece isn't going to solve it, but it's going to engage you and get you to think. So, so those are, I just get so excited about this. I get excited by empowering people to make the decisions that are going to impact your lives in a different way, hopefully.
Jacqueline, I've seen you writing notes. So yeah, talk about challenges and accomplishments and what your panel members have been talking about.
Just FYI, Anne has not changed a bit since. Jacqueline, see you writing notes. I totally agree with Coral's specific words of drink the Kool-Aid, because even the short time that I've been a social worker, you really do get the pushback from community saying, oh, you think you're smart? Oh, so now you're white? Or, so you think you know more than me? And that really does, it's hard to hear, but who else is going to do the job? And especially in the population of Native Americans, how many of them have the tools that, you know, I have to offer you? So I totally agree with that. That's one of the setbacks and one of the challenges that I've come across. And just in general, the readiness for change in the population, that is one of the pushbacks that I get a lot, because people are not willing to change. They're not willing to face the change or the effects of the change. I think they're so focused on the problems and those becoming bigger that they don't see the positives of the change. That can be hard as well. There are many accomplishments that working with community, even the little small changes that you see, those are amazing. To see a youth stand up and introduce themselves and do a presentation on their own, that is amazing in itself. So I think the accomplishments there's too many to name, and I think that's the reason why I do this work and working with community, is because of that. And to see the empowerment of community when you actually sit down and educate them, train them, and build their capacity, that right there in itself is amazing.
And I just want to support what Jacqueline was saying about readiness for change. Sometimes we might not do enough just listening and start to push change before they're ready. And I think for social workers, you'll get cued in really quickly about readiness for change, right? Yeah, Frankie, about challenges and accomplishments. And
So I'm of a little different camp, again, than most of the panel members here. I'm usually part of the community that is pushing, is saying, why are you drinking the Kool-Aid? What happened? So I play that role, and it's a role that I'm proud of for sure. And it's a role that if and when I am ever in an elected position of power, I would want my community to do that to me. To say, remember your values, remember where you come from, remember the stories, remember the work. And for me, it's always doing what guides the work that I do is doing what is morally just, not what is politically winnable. And that's hard, right? Like, that's very idealistic to think about. But I think that we can't keep playing the same game that we have been playing. And I very much so believe in active dialogue. I believe in active listening. But the question is, who are we listening to? Who does have a seat at that table? And if it's not more people that come from the directly impacted communities, I have a problem with that. You know, so to me, it's that we need to be creating more space for those that are experiencing these threats firsthand, whether it's from wage issues, whether it's from immigration policy, whether it's from climate injustices, right? If we're still giving those in positions of power, in positions of privilege, the same type of space and room that we're giving to those that are directly impacted, that are the frontline communities, to me, I personally don't agree with that, and I push back on that. And so one of the challenges, absolutely, is having to navigate working in a type of system where the dominant paradigm is often compromise, which I'm not trying to say that compromise is a negative thing, but from the work that I do and the perspective that I come from, there are certain things that are not compromisable to me. If someone is being separated from their family because they were not born on a certain side of an abstract border, that's wrong to me, and I'm not going to compromise on that. And there's a lot of other issues. So a challenge is trying to do work that is really pushing the boundaries, right? Really pushing these, what I like to call the limits of possibility, right? And we have people in elected positions of power that don't want to do that. They don't think they can do that, and they're oftentimes not willing to do that. So it is challenging having to work in a particular system where, we have all these different interests and we have all of these different interests impacting how we decide, right? Accomplishments, though, are when you go into places like the City of Flagstaff chambers, so where they hold the council meetings, and you have people from the directly impacted communities getting up and speaking in a way that they thought they never could before, and because they were given that platform before, as I've said. So that to me is the major accomplishment. Whether we win or lose, these are kind of hard words. To me, it's more about how have we activated and engaged and pushed the limits of what we thought is possible within our community.
And thanks, Frankie. If you couldn't pass the mic back down to Jamie. Jamie, we've heard from everybody about challenges and accomplishments. What did you?
Oh, nonsense. I've had one of those chats with Frankie. I'm sure other elected officials at this table have had one of those chats with Frankie, that push. And I'll tell you, I'm grateful that she's paying attention. I truly am. And I'm grateful I'm sitting in front of you because I'm holding your seat here. What I'm not grateful for are when we have structures in place. Let's take City Council. City Council is not a diverse council because we call it a part-time position. I think I get paid $22,000 a year, but I retired from NAU, so I also get a pension. Now, why can I do that? It's really because I'm rather privileged. I can do that. I own my own business. I can adjust to hours. I can do that. But not everybody can, right? So if we would just change perhaps the structure, so we bring up at council, let's make this a higher paid position because we want people to be able to leave their jobs and run. That makes sense, doesn't it? And again, some of the pushback is you just want more money. So how do we institute change? The truth is anything we raise will not affect the people sitting on council. It will be for the new people that will come to council. So those kinds of systems, and I think we all talked about them, that are in place that we would love to change, how do we go about doing that? And some things cost money. And I've just got to tell you, I love that you're here, and I love that you're all going to be social workers and or teachers. And some of the things you were saying, and about kind of having not enough, well, teachers do that every day, don't they, in the classrooms, right? They knock on your doors and ask for egg cartons so they can do projects, and so we're all in the same boat. We're not different. But then there's a beauty of being different. And when we sit on a council that is either retired individuals or small business owners or, and we can't get diversity, then how does that voice come? I'll tell you, since sitting on council, some of our meetings go till 10, 12 o'clock at night because we do want to hear from you. We want to hear from everybody. So we don't say, oh, it's 10 o'clock, we have to go home. No more public participation. So I would just really love to let you know that you do have power. You do have voice. And we need your help. That's the bottom line. Elected officials need your help and your voice.
Thanks, Julie.
Mhm.
Okay, so in the interest of leaving some Q&A time, and unfortunately, I will be asking certain students to ponder a question. So the first person I'd like to call on is Ernessa. Ernessa, if the students would stand up, I'd appreciate it. But Ernessa, you had some concerns in class yesterday, and I'd like you to kind of share what you shared yesterday.
Okay.
Do you want the mic? I'm happy to bring you the mic.
Yeah, no, so. So, can you like refresh me? Like, a lot.
Because I was talking about being a Native woman and some of your frustrations about voice and, you know, maybe some of your, yeah, I'll stop there.
I think like one of the things that like I talked about was mostly like being Native American, but then being Dene, and I guess like the differences that like we all have. Like I'm completely different from people who come from a different culture, such as like if they're Hispanic, African American, or Muslim. It's completely different, and I don't know. I think one of the challenges is not being heard. And I think, so going back to like Indigenous Peoples Day for me, I think like it impacts me in a way like I feel overwhelmed, or I just feel in a way unappreciated or forgotten. And I think that's one of the challenging things as being like a social worker or a student in the social work program, and feeling the sense of being critiqued or being judged, of not having like skills that some of my peers may have based on the educational system that we each gone through. And I don't know. Do you want me to like talk about like something specific?
You did good. Okay. So just kind of the idea of representation and voice. And for Vanessa, I think I can't remember what the panel member said this, but you love when somebody gets up and speaks. I think it was Jamie or Frankie but yeah, Ernessa, thanks. And if you want to give it back to.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I really like appreciate like this panel, and it kind of like broadened my perspective about I guess bringing issues to people like in like a higher position. So the President Chang had a panel, student panel. It wasn't well advertised, but a couple of students talked about like certain issues like the minimum wage on campus and why it's lesser than the city of Flagstaff. And for me, I brought up the issue of the president not sending out an email acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day. And I don't know, I felt like really confused afterwards, and because like I didn't really think about like policies that come into play, and I don't know, I think like I was trying to like about the 100% of wanting things to change, but then also not really taking into consideration how it impacts certain individuals or people who might be working in certain positions and they get the blame for it, if that makes sense. And so President Chang didn't really answer my question. I just wanted to know like why she didn't email all the students acknowledging that it was Indigenous Peoples Day since Flagstaff passed, I don't know what to call it, but they passed the bill. And I brought up that like ASU's president sent out an email, and I just felt like disconnected. And I brought up that goal 3 is ensuring that NAU is the #1 leading institution serving Native American students.
Right.
But there's kind of like, I work at the Native American Student Services, or now the Indigenous Student Success Center. And the funding amount they receive there isn't enough. And I don't know, I think it's just kind of like a paradox, or it's not, like things aren't really matching up. And so I guess like I expressed that frustration through Indigenous Peoples Day. But I think like I could have done better presenting my question for her. But
And Coral, give her some tips.
So how many of you are paying tuition to go to school here? So this is the deal. We talk a lot about privilege and who has privilege and who has what power. Each of you in this room have power. You know why? Because each of you in this room are worth something. Each of you are worth your tuition. I want to be clear, I personally feel you're worth much more than that. And I think value should not be equated to how much money you spend, but slipping back into my traditional MBA mode. Okay? So, I think one of the things that students do not do enough of at this university is they do not speak in terms of their power. Okay? I think if you all were to get together, write some letters, not to necessarily the president, but to who's in charge of the universities, which are Board of Regents, and say, my name is so-and-so, this is my student ID, this is how much I pay to go to school here. And I have other choices, because technically you do. Now maybe you don't want to exercise other choices, but you do, right? Okay, economic boycott. Black people have used this, lots of people have used this, right? Okay, we would like for the president of the university to acknowledge it. Indigenous Peoples Day. Matter of fact, we want a few other things to come along with that. I think you guys should start using the economic power and privilege that you have as students, because it doesn't matter what shade you are in this room or what gender you are in this room, you all are paying tuition to go. And I think you guys are not exercising that. That's my personal opinion.
On the panel, talk onto Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's good to know that nothing has really changed. Not good to know, but yeah. I think what you're talking about is making me think about this notion of symbolic gestures, and how what's happening with what you describe at the university, of how it advertises itself as being very welcoming to Indigenous students, having a very high Indigenous student population. It's easy to represent ourselves a certain way, but look at the actions, right? And I think the same goes for outside of the university as well. So passing Indigenous Peoples Day, while it's a beautiful gesture, right? It's no longer Columbus Day. It's a gesture, and I talked to somebody who's local Diné activist, and they brought up the points of this. It's not enough because there's still snowmaking happening on the sacred peaks. There is still a anti-camping ordinance that essentially makes being homeless illegal in this city. So we can pass these resolutions, right? We have a resolution that's like, we don't want to discriminate against undocumented people. What are we actually doing to protect documented people? Well, not much really, because it's just a gesture. And so that's our work, right? As I think social workers, I'm not a social worker, I'm an organizer, but that's our work as, maybe I'll just say, that's our work as like youth of this, is to push for more than just these symbolic gestures and to organize amongst ourselves and to keep going. keep going. So I just wanted to just echo that. I hear you. It doesn't just happen at the university. Certainly happens in a lot of areas, and that's why we're here, is to make sure that we keep pushing for more, push for actual tangible action, right?
So, are there any other questions from students?
Can I just-
Oh, you have a response, and then Gerardo, you can.
Okay. Just want to tell you that no matter where you go as a Native American woman, you're going to be seen as, I want to say I just had the word, but it just left my mind. You're going to be seen as more of a irritant when you ask questions, when you push and you push and you push because you want to be heard. But I'm going to tell you, girl, keep asking and keep pushing, because that's the only way you're going to make change. Because things don't change unless you put pressure on it. And building that collective voice is what you see right now. You see these little, I don't want to say little, but you see these small organizations coming up, even like on Instagram, Facebook. They're pushing, they're collecting more individuals, and their voice is being heard, and it's building and building and building. So you're seeing this trend of Native American, I don't want to say activism, but that's the only word I can think of. But you can see it coming up. And I think the more we push, the more we focus to be heard and to hear our voice, the more people will, come around. So I'm hoping, and that's all I have right now is for hope, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to realize time. I know students have other things to move on to. We could do this for half a day. Would people be interested in continuing this dialogue at another time? And because if that's something we can do, we can try to maybe do something again in the spring. But I do want to hear some closing comments. Gerardo, I want you to ask your question, say your thing. Please make sure you take food, because I really pressed that you guys get enough to eat. And now I see the crowd has shrunk, so it's really important that you stuff your pockets with that food so that I don't hear we overboard, okay? So Gerardo, you have the floor, and then just some final wrap up about social.
Hi. Mike, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So first off, I think we all appreciate you being here. I personally would love to attend the second one, and it's just inspiring hearing all that you've done, all that you're doing, and it makes me want to do more. And then for my question, I have kind of a push and pull on. Okay, for the question, how it's more what's more important, diversity or how well someone can do a job. A big thing about that, even in this panel, there's a lot of diversity, and I love seeing that. I love seeing that there's, and, but I know that there's sometimes where it's kind of taken too far, where it's if you don't have this diversity, you can't continue to do the job. And I agree that there should be a certain amount, because everyone brings their own experience, everyone brings their own past into their work. But to what point is it where it's more important for that than having the credentials, having the experience, having the knowledge to do that job? And I know Coral mentioned how important diversity was, and you mentioned how with the judges, it wasn't about having a D or an R after, it was about being able to do the job. So I'm hoping that there's maybe a good response to that.
Thank you for that question. It's a fantastic question. At least for me, if there's a system that stops a diverse, say, council, then I believe that should be changed. I really do. At least, open it up to people. Right now, we really can't, unless you can quit your job and live on $22,000 a year. And most people can't. So I believe that we owe it to the systems to evaluate them. First of all, learn what they are, evaluate them, and then change them if they're not doing the job they should.
Is diversity more important than skill or the ability to do the job? So I just go back to the people that I've hired to work for me. I look for the passion, because you can train somebody to do the job. What I want to know is that, are you passionate about what we're doing? Are you willing to come in on the weekends or work at nights and knock on doors and walk the street? Because if you have that passion, you're trained to do the job. So I don't know if that helps.
That's great.
Okay.
Totally agree. In working with Native American organizations, we specifically focus on Native American individuals hiring to our agency, but over the past few years, we look at more of passion, more of your experience as an individual and working with Native American populations and your heart. And that's basically what I look for when I hire individuals is, what is your experience? Not necessarily what are your credentials, but what are you as a human being? What is in your heart? Is that basically what I look for.
Thank you for that question. I think I mean, obviously, there's a fine line, right, between diversity and inclusion, right? So the goal isn't to just be like, we have this many folks of color, this many people that identify as women. You know, it's, if you're doing that, well, I think that's wrong. Because obviously, we want people that are skilled at the work they do, and very much so they're passionate at the work they do. And it's complicated, and I think it goes to always having the community's needs at the center. And if there are, the problem is that we tend to still have people in these positions that do come from more backgrounds like that maybe we're from, right? As opposed to actively going out into the community, building relationships, and finding people that do have those skill sets, right? That are already doing that work. So providing those opportunities and those openings for people that are already doing that and can do it in really different, innovative ways. So it's definitely not, yeah, I just, yeah.
So just real quick, it's a great question, because it's how do you operationalize values? And it's all about that. And I want to take one. So I believe it's really important to know where you stand. I believe the numbers are really important to know where you stand. On the county, so we have 1,000 employees. You know, we all were going, well, we probably have pay equity between men and women in our organization. We don't know. You have to go in and find that out. You need data to go find out, saying, are we treating women in our workplace like the national average is, where if you are a woman, you make 72 cents in the dollar? It turns out we're not. But you have to go ask that question. We try to be relational to the communities we serve. I want to know how many Indigenous people work for our organization. I want to know how many different people of different ethnicity and sexual orientation, because I think it's my responsibility to lead intentionally, to have an organization that reflects who we serve and who pays our salaries, which is you. So it's really important. Every recruitment we talk about at the county talks about diversity, and look at how diversity, the notion of diversity, has changed and continues to change. It is not a static conversation. It is beyond race and ethnicity and orientation. It is about how our life experiences even. And that's how you get passion, is when you can look at diversity through the lens of what gets you up in the morning, what gets you going, what gets you ready to show up at work to make a difference.
Yes. Oh, LeVay? LeVay? You want the mic? You need the mic.
When I think of diversity and versus like having the quality of the job, I think we can still have equal diversity and that person having the quality to be in that job. The problem is like in not having diversity, like not having like equal resources from the ground, you know, like children, just like elementary school, like the children don't have like equal resources compared to other, you know, race and colors. And for example, like I came from Africa, and so the resources that what I want to do, I feel like it impacts me a lot. Like I want to be able to maybe, and where you guys are sitting, but it's really difficult because I never have the same equal resources as some of the members. So like just from the beginning, helping those children have an equal opportunity so they can be the opposite side of the chair can really help with having like equal diversity and also making sure those people have the right credentials to work in those courses. So that's just what pops in here.
Well, I would like to take a minute. Yesterday, Art and I were on a council, and we're looking at suicide rates and what can we do. So, number one, we would love your help with this, and we will call on you to be part of maybe a commission or a council, so you could help us guide where we need to go. And we do have many partners to be in that, and would love to partner with you. And then we'd love to partner with our high schools, and if you think middle schools should be in that, then so we really need your help in guidance, and I promise that you'll be hearing from us, and I hope some of you will take that opportunity. You know, I just wanted to say, I have probably lived 3 of your lifetimes. So it's really not that you know, I'm this person, I'm you, right? And I've just had longer time at this, and you will have that too. So, I mean, when we begin to compare, I'm not so sure we need to. Maybe how long have we lived on this planet? Yes, and that just gives you more opportunity. So I understand your point, and I'm not saying that I don't understand that, but also, you know, I've lived 3 of your lifetimes, and now I get, you know, to do this. So the other thing I do want to say that the chief of police, Dan Musselman, said, please, please, please put this cry out that we are looking for individuals who could be emergency communication people. Hours are very variable, and it starts at $21.12 an hour. So he left me cards, and he just said, please, you know, if you're interested, you're in a helping profession, this is certainly one being a dispatcher. So if you're interested, I'll leave this information and you can call or email me.
And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for your interest in what we had to say. I appreciate being on the panel with everybody up here, so thank you as well. And thank you for those of us who brought us here. And I want to mention, if you're on Facebook, if you could go to @a Mailbox Project and check that out. It's a new grassroots effort that's going on here in Flagstaff.
All right, Grant Bakegood.
Okay, can I add one thing?
Okay.
Just one closing thing in regards to judgment. You're gonna hear about this a lot when you're in the social work career. Be aware of your judgments regardless of who you are. Identify what it is that really triggers you, because that's really gonna help you when you're working with other individuals. But basically, we're all human beings and we're trying to strive for better change. So be aware of that.
Thank you.
Sergeant.